which the subtitle of this particular broadcast will be Light in the Midst of Darkness. So far, we've been looking at all the individual parties who were involved on one level or another in the overall tragic demise of Uzzah, found in 2 Samuel chapter 6. But there is a silent party that was just as responsible for the events leading up to Uzzah's death as were others. And by a silent party, what I'm actually talking about is the leadership. For their crimes were not crimes of ignorance, nor was it crimes of blatant, willful, overt disobedience. Rather, their crimes were crimes of omission. The failure to neglect and render aid. The failure of leadership to use their position of influence to lead others in the right path or direction. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're probably thinking, well, this is a sermon about leadership. That doesn't apply to me. Well, when we're talking about leadership, we can be talking about unofficial or official. In other words, by leadership, all I'm simply saying is that a position, by leadership, all I'm really talking about is a position by which we have influence over someone else. And all of us in our lives have spheres of influence, have flocks, have individuals through which our relationship with them, we have a certain sway, if you will, over them. In other words, our opinions hold a lot of weight in certain relationships. So by that definition or by that idea, all of us are in some form or fashion in a unofficial, if you will, position of leadership. In other words, we have the ability to influence, direct, and guide someone's direction or path. The leadership in 2 Samuel chapter 6, as bad decisions were being made, as a man's early demise was met, the priest, the Levites, the scribes, they were there, they were present, but then again, they weren't. They were present, but yet absent, for their voice was not heard, ringing out the call of reason. For we find in Deuteronomy chapter 31 that the priest and the elders and the scribes, they had a requirement. They had responsibilities placed on them by God. The Bible reads, then Moses wrote this law and gave it to the priest, the sons of Levi who carried the ark of the covenant of the Lord, and to all the elders of Israel. And Moses commanded them, at the end of every 7 years, at the set time in the year of release, at the Feast of Booths, when all Israel comes to appear before the Lord your God, at the place that he will choose, you shall read this law before all Israel in their hearing. The leaders had a biblical responsibility to instruct the people of the law, to carry out ritual duties, and to appear, according to Leviticus chapter 16, to appear once a year before the mercy seat, before the Ark of the Covenant, to ask for prayers of forgiveness of sins, and to offer up sacrifice on the Day of Atonement. But what we see is, because the leaders failed to do what they should have done, because they failed to let their light shine in dark situations, we can kind of see the course of events set in motion by their simple neglect. 1 Samuel chapter 4, the Israelites were in a battle against the Philistines, and they were being defeated in a major way. Then the soldiers, verse 3, returned to the camp. The elders of Israel asked, why did the Lord bring defeat on us today before the Philistines? Let us bring the ark of the Lord's covenant from Shiloh, that it may go with us and save us from the hands of rain. The leader's voice, the priests, the scribes, the Levites, were nowhere to be heard when this bad idea to basically take the Ark of the Covenant and to treat it like a lucky charm, to put it out in front of them in battle, hoping that, like rubbing a magic genie lamp, it would bring them some good fortune. But where were their voices to say, no, this is a bad idea? No, God did not tell us to bring it out in battle. No, I don't think we should do this. Their voices were absent. And as a result, the ark was captured by the Philistines. And as a result, the Philistines then returned the ark back to Israel. But when they returned the ark back to Israel, where were the leaders to go and get the ark and to bring the ark back to its rightful place? They were nowhere to be found. Then in chapter 7, the Bible tells us that the ark was left in Kiriath Jearim for 20 years. Where were the leaders when this great instrument of God was neglected and forgot about over 20 years? Their voices were silent. Their cries were few and far between, and very few used their light, used their influence to say, wait a minute, we need to reevaluate this. We need to make different decisions. In 2 Samuel chapter 6, when the decision was made to go and get the ark after 20 years, where was their voice to say, wait a minute, let's make sure we're doing this the right way? And what happened? Because they neglected to cry out, because they neglected to let their light shine, the ark was lost for 20 years. And because the ark was lost for 20 years, an entire generation grew up unfamiliar, ignorant, and unaware of the ark, how to carry it, or even for that matter, what the ark actually even was. It was gone for 20 years. Because someone decided to be passive. Someone decided to give in to the peer pressure. Someone decided to give in to people pleasing, rather than to hold firm to their responsibilities as leaders and to use their influence to change the direction, which ultimately led to someone's death. But wait a minute, let's back the train up a little bit. You said their responsibility was to appear before the ark once a year, to ask for forgiveness of sins from God. Well, if that was their duty, what in the world have they been doing for the past 20 years? I mean, at some point, didn't they realize that there was a big piece of furniture that was right there that now it isn't? That this big old massive ark is no longer where it should have been? And that they weren't appearing before the ark of the mercy seat? Shouldn't someone who knew their job description stop and say, wait a minute, isn't today the Day of Atonement? Shouldn't we be standing before the ark of the Lord and offering up sacrifices? Well, wait a minute, where is the ark of the Lord? It's where? Okay. But because they were silent and passive, overall events were set in motion that would have fatal consequences. I mean, it's like being a cook at McDonald's and you come into work one day, right? You realize all the cash registers are gone. Or you realize your grill is missing. I mean, I'm a cook at McDonald's. I kind of need my grill in order to perform my duties. I mean, at some point, I'm going to need a cash register. And at some point, you're going to stop and ask, wait a minute, where is the cash register? Where is the grill? I can't do my job unless I have these items. Somebody needs to explain why we don't have these items. And it needs to be a good explanation. But for 20 years, the ark was missing. And for 20 years, they didn't do what they should have been doing, for they couldn't have because they didn't have the ark. And for 20 years, they sat by amiss, silent, and passive, causing a bad situation to turn what? Causing a bad situation to turn for the worst. Because no one stood up, the ark was captured and lost. Because no one stood up, a generation grew up ignorant and unfamiliar. And because no one stood up and used their influence, a bad decision was made that have grave consequences, i.e. Uzzah died. Now, let's try to bridge the gap and bring this full circle. What does this have to do with me as a everyday Joe Blow Christian living my life? Well, I already mentioned that we all have spheres or relationships in which we have a lot of influence. One of which relationships would be our children. We, as parents, have the ability to influence our children for better or for worse. But if I'm not growing and I'm not developing as a Christian, how can I positively influence my children? If my light is not shining from within, how can I direct my child in the right path? Leading is not just a matter of telling someone what they need to be doing and what they ought to be doing and what they should be doing. Rather, leadership is by example, going out in front of the person and showing them the way by your life, not just in word, but by your actions. The whole notion of do as I say and not as I do is foolishness, because children often imitate what they see more so than what they hear. All right, let me give you a personal example. So here I am one day coming home, summertime, hot. So I go to the kitchen to get me a glass cold drink. And then, as I walked, to my surprise, was my 3-year-old standing there with the refrigerator wide open, drinking out of a carton of milk, just chugging that. And then, of course, as a loving parent, I proceeded to chastise him. But my wife brought up one very interesting detail. She says, "You know where he got that from, right?" I said, "Where did he get that from?" "Where did he get it from?" She said, "From you. For you drink out of the carton and not pour it into a cup. Therefore, your child drinks out of the carton and he doesn't pour it into a cup." And I must admit, I am guilty of taking a swig of juice out of the carton here and there. But the point I'm making is that my actions influence my child. And so now he drinks out of the carton of milk or juice without a cup. Why? Because he saw daddy do it. And so all I'm simply saying is that your actions have implications far beyond your imagination. So if I want my child to develop certain character traits or to live his life in a certain direction, then I myself need to embody these character traits and be headed towards that direction myself. That is why it is called leadership. You who say, "Watch your tongue, young man," you better watch what you're saying, or you check your attitude. Do you yourself say things that you shouldn't say? Do you just let anything slip out of your mouth? Do you fly off the handle and yell and get belligerent? Are you lazy and irresponsible? Have poor work ethic or drive? Well, then don't be surprised if your child, the product of your loins, comes out with those same character traits. All I'm simply saying is that as parents, this is one situation in which we have the influence by which we can stand up, let our light shine, so we can direct our children down the right path. Their actions, what we do and what we fail to do, have the ability to impact everyone around us. I mean, think about this. Follow me for a second. How many of us go to our jobs and they're very stressful, difficult working situations? Oftentimes, why? Because we're working around very stressful and difficult people. And why are these people difficult? Because there's issues in their lives. So because this individual has issues in his life, he now brings it to the job. And now because he brings his issues to the job, now he frustrates and aggravates other people who are on the job. And now these people on the job who are frustrated by this individual then go home tired, worn out, and frustrated, which guess what? Impacts their faith. All I'm simply saying is that what you do or don't do, what you say or don't say, has the ability to impact lives beyond your own and even generations to come. This is what essentially Christianity is all about. Realizing that God has put us in a situation that we have to let our light shine, that we have the responsibility to influence others, responsibility to cry out when people are headed in the wrong direction, to stop and point them in the right direction, to be the voice of reason when situations call for that voice of reason. We can use our light for the better within our jobs, within our homes, other relationships, within the community. There are various situations in which, as Christians, we can carry some weight with our opinions. But the question is, what are you going to do with it? Are you going to be silent? Are you going to put that light in a basket under the bed? Or are you going to put it out so that all can see, so that all can be directed in the right path? Are you going to be the salt which adds flavor? Are you going to be the light which shines bright? Are we going to be the ones that lead the lost and the brokenhearted and point back to the cross? Are we going to use our influence for the better? To not just be the sheep, not just go along with the go along, not just be passive and sit back when we have the ability to influence. When we see people headed in the wrong direction, are we going to shout, "Stop, turn around"? When we see a situation isn't going to end well, what are we going to do? A man, going back to 2 Samuel chapter 6, ultimately lost his life because events were set in motion. and because bad choices were made, because someone didn't use their influence to change the course of events or to influence the decisions that were later made, because someone knew better but didn't do better. Someone died. You see, we have a responsibility as Christians to let our light shine, to overcome darkness with our light. You see, whenever it's dark, what do? You turn the light up. But whenever it's light, you can't turn darkness up. Darkness only prevails in the absence of light. So when our light is not shining, then darkness prevails. But we have this responsibility to turn up the light so that we can overcome the darkness by our influence in the world today. As you go throughout your life, I hope that you are able to look at your decisions, to look at your choices as things that have the ability to impact others' lives and to use them in the proper manner. This is God's mind on the matter at hand, hoping that you let your light shine for all to see. Until we tune in next time, may the Lord bless you, may the Lord keep you,